So I think a lot of people think, well, I'm far behind, I have to shoot the lights out now, and I have to become the next Robinhood trader or whatever and find the next Tesla. It's not necessarily the case. It's still your savings rate that matters most at that stage in life and how much you put aside. So it's not too late for people. It's just it's really hard to get started at that point.
So somebody who needs little to no introduction, Ben Carlson. If you're listening to this podcast, that means you probably read the blog, and A Wealth of Common Sense is pretty much on the mixtape almost every week, if not multiple times a month. So I'm excited to have you on, Ben, because you're one of my favorite bloggers. Also, over the years, become, I would say, a little bit of a friend. And you have a new book out called Saving for Retirement. So if you're watching this on YouTube, here's what it looks like. And we'll get you all the links and everything to read it. But I wanted to have like a quick conversation just to talk about it, let more people know about it, because as you know, retirement is something that everybody has a goal of, yet very few people are prepared for it in the way that they should be. So a good book like this is very beneficial. So I picked out a few chapters for us to dive into, have a little conversation about those and kind of go off on some tangents. But before we get there, just like the real basic general, so obviously the book's about retirement, but what led you to write it and who did you write it for?
It came about from the work we do. So obviously people like you and I, we're eating this stuff up every day. We pay attention to it. We create content. We're talking about it all the time. We're studying it, learning it. We're a small percentage of the population. Most people just are bored by this stuff or they don't care. And so we actually have a guy on our team, Dan LaRosa, who does 401k plans, and that's his specialty. And he said, listen, I love all the content you guys create about the markets and personal finance and all these things, but most of the people who are just normal, regular 401k savers, they're just never going to read a financial blog on a consistent basis. They're never going to listen to a podcast. So I would love to just have content for them that just provides the basic building blocks. And I said, okay, I can do that. So I was going to come up with a white paper or something, and the more I started writing, the more I realized that there is a little bit more that goes into it, and it turned out to be a short self-published book. And the idea was to write it for someone who is younger and maybe doesn't know what they should be paying attention to, or someone who's a little older and maybe is a little overwhelmed and don't know what they should be paying attention to. So it was really for that group of people who just don't know where to start and just need to get the basic building blocks and don't need to get bogged down by all the details.
How was self-publishing it? Was that a fun process?
So I did one of those before a few years ago. It is certainly different. Amazon makes it really easy for you. And I had a bunch of advisors reach out afterwards and say, hey, how did you do that? And actually Amazon makes it easy for you. The whole process is simple. You have to do more of the stuff yourself. And as you know, a lot of the stuff you've done, you've kind of learned on the go, and as far as content creation, and I have too, but it's pretty interesting and pretty neat. And the great thing is you have control over it. The reason I did that is so we could send books out to these 401k plans and not have to worry about ordering a bunch of them from a publisher. And it's kind of Amazon prints them on demand, and it gives you a lot more control over it. So I really liked I wrote a piece on it, so we can link to that. But it just gives you a lot of control. You have to do a little bit more, outsource more, but you have total control over the process in a lot of different areas, which you don't really get with a published book.
All right, so the final question on the making of the book and what it's about, the illustrations. I know that you went and found somebody on Fiverr or Upwork to get that done.
Yeah, Upwork.
Okay, so, and I've also seen a couple pieces of content that have come reusing. So are these illustrations, the people in your book, are they going to be a part of your content going forward?
I kind of like using that as a visual, because especially for people who don't care as much about this, they don't want to just see words and numbers and graphs and charts. It's good to try to visualize it and tell a story in that way. So that was the idea behind it. And luckily I was able to find an illustrator who's actually from Central America do it, which is one of the wonderful things about just the interconnectedness of the world now. So yeah, I just wanted to tell a story that way and try to explain what each chapter was about through some illustration.
So as we knock out a couple of these chapters, I don't want to go too deep into them because I don't want you to give everything away to where nobody needs the book. And one of the things I like about the book is you can see it's not full of fluff. It's just direct and right to it and easy to understand. So we don't want to give everything away, but I got 4 chapters to kind of hit on. And the first one I really love. It's the power of small wins. So I'm a big believer in momentum. Like, we're not talking about investing here, but like working with a client, I try to build in as much momentum into their plan because I think they'll stay with it. And to me, the power of small wins kind of feeds into that. So, high level synopsis of the power of small wins. What was it about that chapter that made you want to include it in the book?
I think especially for people just getting started, if they don't have anything saved, they assume, what's the point of saving just a little bit? Because then I won't really see any results. So the old saying is save a little bit of money each year, and by the end of the year you have a little bit of money saved. And it's hard to see results, but I think for a lot of people it's more about developing habits. And so I talk about my personal experience. I made very little money coming out of college. I had enough to save $50 a month. And for some people, that's stretching your budget, but if you just start out with that much and just develop the good habits, then as you progress in your career and you make more money, you're able to carve out more money and save. And I think it's more about building good habits than anything. And it's important to celebrate those small wins too, and not think, on day one, I'm going to just go run a marathon. It's like, okay, I'm going to run a couple times a week and really try to just get into the routine of doing it instead of trying to go all out right away.
So what are some easy ways to make these small wins easier to attain or actually happen? Because we can put these winnable things out there, but if we don't make it easier for us to do it, like that behavior doesn't develop. So kind of what's your hack to make those wins actually happen?
I mean, the easiest thing for saving is just making it automatic. Treat it like it's a bill every month. Treat it like it's you're paying you pay your Netflix $12.99 a month or whatever. That's how saving should be viewed as well. And so it's one of those things that is basically untouchable. So you have your $50, $100, $250, $500,000 a month, whatever you're saving, you view that as a bill unless you come into an extreme emergency situation. So I just view it as like it's part of your every monthly budget.
And one thing I would add to that is I think about telling people to just automate it, get it going. I think a lot of times people want to focus on like the details. Okay, where should I save it? Where's the most effective place? Like eventually that's important to figure out, but like just get yourself in the act of doing the saving and then go talk to somebody at Ritholtz or go find an advisor to be able to help you figure out, well, where's the best place to direct that $500 or $50 or $25. But don't not start saving because you're trying to figure out the best place to do it. Like get it going and then you can distribute it wherever you want to go. Because I think sometimes people want to focus on the details and then they never actually get it going.
Right, because we have fleeting willpower. So just getting that, even if you're putting it in a savings account that's earning nothing right now, getting that habit started, and then down the line, if you want to learn more about investing and where to allocate it, that's half the ballgame right there.
Okay, so that kind of ties into building assets, but you talk about the biggest asset. So chapter 5, your biggest asset. It's not necessarily a retirement account or a savings account. So what's the biggest asset in your eyes?
Well, especially for young people, it's time. That's something that Warren Buffett, would look at young people these days and see how much they have in front of them. It's human capital. And the way that I like to look at it is, I know I included some compound interest tables in here. Most of the people who aren't, big into finance will kind of roll their eyes at those, and it probably won't have much of impact. But the whole part of it to me is when you get it going at a young age, it just opens up more options when you're older. It allows you to take some more risks. It gives you some more margin of safety in your life. And it frees you up to maybe do some other moves in the future that you wouldn't have the possibility to do. So that's why it's so hard for young people, because if you're in your 20s or early 30s and you have 3-4 decades until you're going to retire, it's hard for a lot of people to think about getting to that stage and planning for retirement because it's so far out. Like, people say, I'll just worry about that later. How can I save in this economy? Those types of things. And so I think for people, it's more about, developing good habits so you can take some risks early in your life too. And it's not just about getting to retirement and moving to Florida. It's about, setting yourself up to have, the ability to make choices, and money's not a problem when you can make those.
I love that idea of giving yourself freedom and opportunities. And one of the ones, I have a blog post that I have outlined, I just haven't written it yet. And it's something that I'm fortunate to find myself in a position that I can speak to. This can happen. But if you get an early start, the whole time thing, we talk about the rule of 72 and things compounding, and that's important. But if you get a good start and get those small wins going and build it, the opportunity and freedom can come earlier in life than retirement. And what I'm getting at is, if you do a good job saving early on and you're fortunate to be able to, you might find yourself in your mid-career getting into your 40s and have enough of a nest egg that time and compound interest is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you to get to your future goals, which would allow you to potentially scale back your savings to go pursue other endeavors. Maybe you want to travel more as your kids get older. Maybe you want to start a business. Maybe you want to change something with what's going on. If you've already got that nest egg, and because you started earlier and that time's working for you, you have a little bit more flexibility and opportunity earlier in your life, not just in retirement. And that's what I want people to think about as well.
Yeah, and that's when you reach your maybe midlife crisis phase and you get a little unhappy in your work situation and you realize I really wanted to do this, but I didn't do it when I was young and I had these responsibilities. Yeah, it's more about financial freedom than it is about, building money and seeing the compound interest grow until you retire, because, part of it is you have to enjoy some of it now too. You can't save it all for later and just bury it under a rock for, when you're 60 or 70 years old.
And I love that more of us are talking about finding that balance between the preparation for the future, preparing for retirement, but also enjoying today along the way. I feel like younger professionals want to find that balance. They want to experience along the way, and more of us advisors are realizing that you can actually do both. It's not all sacrifice today for tomorrow. So I'm glad that these things are coming up. All right, so we've talked about how this book is for both sides, young professionals and those that maybe get a little bit later start. Let's talk about for somebody who's picking this book up later, they realize they haven't prepared enough. They feel like maybe retirement's too close and they're behind the 8 ball. You've got a chapter for those people, late retirement, chapter 20. Kind of what are you talking about in that chapter, and kind of giving these people hope as far as what retirement could look like for them, even if they get a late start?
Right, because the numbers I found were pretty sad in a lot of ways. So the Federal Reserve put these numbers together, and it was like people aged 55 to 61 have a median retirement balance of $21,000, meaning half people have less than that saved. So there's a ton of people older in life who are either going to be relying on Social Security to fund their retirement, or they're going to have to just basically step it up and figure it out later in their life and work more or whatever. And the numbers I found were, it's not that hard to start building wealth if you start in your late 40s, 50s. You have a lot to make up, but it's not impossible. But the thing that I found was, even at that stage in life, it's much better to have a higher savings rate. And hopefully at that point, your kids are out of the house. They're maybe off your payroll, and you have the ability to save a little bit more. And I think that's probably a problem a lot of people run into is they put their kids first, which is great. And maybe they had some problems with their finances where they didn't take care of themselves. They didn't put the oxygen mask on first. But I actually found, I ran the numbers. So let's say you're saving, you start in your 40s or 50s and you've got 20 years to save, which is, not as much time for compound interest. If you were to take a 10% savings rate and a 6% return, you can still, put aside a substantial amount of money. But if you were to double your savings rate, that's actually gets you further over 10 or 20 years than it does if you double your investment return. So going from 10% to 20% as a savings rate gives you a better return than going from 6% to 12% on your investment return. So I think a lot of people think, well, I'm far behind. I have to shoot the lights out now. I have to become the next Robinhood trader or whatever and find the next Tesla. It's not necessarily the case. It's still your savings rate that matters most at that stage in life and how much you put aside. So it's not too late for people. It's just it's really hard to get started at that point.
I also think it brings in a new vision of retirement, of like retirement will not always be I walk out on my last day and never work another day. I think for the younger generation, it makes sense to think about your career in kind of some waves, but some of those kind of that are in that sandwich generation where they've got the kids and the parents are helping take care of now, they may have to actually work into their 70s, but maybe on a more reduced workload. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that, assuming you're healthy. From my experience, clients that retire early, if you will, and then have nothing, age a lot faster. But those clients that retire to something, they go do, whether it's volunteer work or in this situation, maybe they're earning a little bit of income. They're still around people. They have a purpose. They age much better going to retirement. So I think that this may be the beginning of a transition of you have a semi-retirement that we all plan for that takes us into our 70s because we're living 90 years and beyond. And then we get to the traditional retirement a little bit later on.
And one of the things I found researching the book is retirement is still a relatively new concept. I mean, back in the day, people's retirement plan was they keeled over and died, right? And so even now that people are living longer and you have 2, 3, maybe 4 decades if you retire in your 40s or 50s to make your money last, and not only to make your money last, but to live a fulfilling life. So yeah, a lot of it is understanding and defining what retirement means for you. Some people still could just want to go golfing in Florida and sit on the beach and read all day. but other people are going to have a hard time doing that. And it's hard for me to say now. I'm approaching 40. It's hard for me to ever see myself wanting to stop working. But that may change when I approach my 50s and 60s. And I think that's the point, is just having an open mind and realizing that any plans that you make now will probably change, and that's why you want to give yourself some flexibility.
And that's the reason books like this and conversations like this are good, is to get people to start really thinking about what retirement might look like based on what they've been able to do, what they haven't been able to do, and then also what their preferences are. Like, one thing to think about is what you said. If we're living maybe 4 or 5 decades, depending on when you retire, in retirement, and you're giving yourself 3 decades or less to prepare for it, and if you figure your first decade of work, you're probably not doing a whole lot. Like, how realistic is that if you just think about it from that standpoint? You have 2, maybe 3 decades to plan and save for 4 or 5 decades. Like, that shift has to be made. And I think these conversations in your book kind of help that. All right. So going into chapter 23, you've got 20 rules, and there was a few of them that I really wanted to dive on. One of them being income is not the same as savings. I like that thought process. Kind of, what do you mean when you say that?
I think that's one of the misnomers, especially when you're first starting out and you start making money and you try to compare yourself to what others are making, and not think about, okay, well, what is this money doing for me? And someone who makes, whatever, $1 million a year, but is spending it all, that's not creating wealth, versus someone who's making $50,000 a year, but they only spend, a certain percent, 40,000 of it, and they have $10,000 left over. It's really about, it's a lot of times it's what people don't see, and it's the savings, and it's hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that just because you make a large income doesn't necessarily mean you're wealthy. It's what you do that income.
A lot of times, we find, especially being on the inside of the business, that those that have the biggest incomes often have the least amount of savings. They're just spending it all, and they have this lifestyle they have to show. And that's why there's the millionaire next door. Like, all those success stories of the people you would never guess have all of this money because they live well below their means. Which kind of ties into the next one, getting the big purchases right. I know you and Michael have talked about this. I know you've written about it before. I think this is a very big concept. Susie Orman talks about the coffee, and that all gets its run on Twitter, and we make fun of it. But to your point, getting the big purchases has the most impact. What do you want to share on that? I think I stole your thunder, but
no, it's really about getting like your house and your transportation. If you get those things right, because those are your big fixed costs, right? And they also have these ancillary costs attached to them. So if you can really right-size those within your budget, it not only helps from a saving perspective, but it lowers the stress in the rest of your life, so you don't have to stress over going out to lunch a couple times a week, or getting that coffee, or buying books whenever you want, or whatever your small vice is. You don't have to worry about it if you get those big things right, because if you take on too much house or too much car, and it just really shortens your ability to have a margin of safety in your finances, it's really hard to save, but it's also hard to spend correctly in other areas of your life that might make you happy, even though it's a small $5 or $10 purchase every once in a while.
And if we think about trying to build lives that allow us to live the most fulfilled life and bring the greatest amount of happiness, chances are the flexibility to go to Starbucks with a friend or go to dinner whenever you want and not have to sweat over it brings way more satisfaction and happiness than having a new car or a big house. Like, those things will be exciting early on, but then the excitement wanes off. And I think having those experiences and that flexibility and that lack of worry is worth way more than the big keeping up with the Joneses. Choose your friends, neighborhood, and spouse wisely. What do you mean by that?
Well, we all it would be nice if we lived in an absolute world, but it's all relative. So you look at the people around you and what they're spending their money on, and oftentimes, that's the stuff you spend your money on. So one of the stats I found, they did this study where they found people who won the lottery in Canada, and they found that it was actually their neighbors in their neighborhood went bankrupt more than the people who won the lottery, because the neighbors tried to keep up with the new purchases of those people who had won the lottery. And so you see people around you buying toys, buying a boat, buying a jet ski, whatever it is, spending a lot of money and going out all the time, and you try to keep up with that. And you have no idea what their personal financial circumstances are, what their goals are, how much they're saving. And so trying to keep up with these other people, it's just a never-ending game, and it's even harder than it ever was, because now we can look at people not only in our neighborhood, but on the internet, Instagram. You see people going on vacations and what they're spending their money on and bragging about how great their lives are, and that's just a game you're never going to win. I think that's one of the things that I've really realized from having kids especially is just learning to not really care what other people think about you. That's like such a gift I think that kids give you, because you have to spend so much more time worrying about them, and you get to, it's almost a luxury to not spend as much time worrying about yourself. And so I think that's one of the things is just that game. And I got trapped in that when I was younger too. But getting yourself out of that mindset can just save you a lot of stress and strain, and also help you in your finances too.
I have two quick comments on that. I think we all have to go through that. It's one of those things that we can tell you that, but you have to experience it yourself and find and get to that point where you're comfortable not caring what other people think, and realizing that that next big purchase really isn't going to bring you happiness. So we can tell you that, but that's one of the things that you have to experience. I think where we can help by telling people that is we can help them figure that out sooner. Like, you've got to experience that and get to that point. And if we can speed that up, the better off. The other thing about surrounding yourself with people, if your friends are living this financial lifestyle that you can't maintain, then it might be worthwhile to find a new circle of friends. And I know that sounds crazy to say you drop your friends because their bad habits are rubbing off on you. But if you're really serious about fixing things and making progress, surround yourself with people that are doing the same things that you want to do. The average of the 5 people you're surrounded by, like if you want to be surrounded by people who are financially responsible and your friends aren't, go hang out with people who are financially responsible. And then you're going to have that moral support, and that's going to help you stay with those good habits.
And I found for people that makes not even just your finances, but I as I get older and have more responsibilities, just friends that have a lot of drama or negativity, I found like I just don't want those people in my life anymore. It's not worth it. And so it's the same thing.
All right, the final one I want to hit on, it's one that I think is often the answer to many financial planning problems, but very, very few people want to say it because it seems disingenuous and it's not the easiest answer, but make more money. So if you're not on track for your retirement goals, you've cut all the fat out of the budget and there's nowhere else. Like, sometimes the answer is you have to make more money, and it's not as easy as, snapping your fingers and now you have extra income. But I think that that's something that's important for people to think of, is how can you potentially make more money to help out. But in that chapter, or I guess in that rule, what's so important in your eyes?
Well, that's one of the things that most personal finance experts stay away from. So a lot of them preach frugality and how to save, and that's great. But that, you hit a ceiling on that eventually. And I never realized this at first. I said, I made a very small salary when I came out of school and didn't have much room to work with. And I found that the best thing I could do is just make myself more employable. And that means, you continuously are learning. You're trying to improve yourself. You're investing in yourself. You're reading. You're going to conferences. You're networking. Whatever it is, whatever you have to do to get ahead. It's one of those things where it's almost like a taboo subject in terms of understanding how to negotiate, whether it's with a future employer or your current employer, and try to become more, it's almost impossible to get rid of you if you're proving your worth. But it's hard because no one really sets you out. There's no classes that teach you how to improve your career basically and earn more money, and a lot of times people have a hard time even discussing it with their employer, or if they're trying to go out on their own. So if you really want to supercharge your savings, that's one way to do it. Even if you keep a similar savings rate, if you're making more money over time and earning more, it's so much easier to save. And it doesn't necessarily mean all your financial problems are solved, but making more money certainly gives you some more options.
And we live in a time where like everybody talks about having side hustles, and we kind of make fun of it, but it is easier to set up a business on the side that could maybe make a couple, it doesn't have to be $1 million business, a couple $100 extra of something that you do, that you have a skill that you enjoy. I'm trying to get Roman to edit his friends' Fortnite videos and charge them like $10. Like little things like that you do and enjoy. It's easier to set up a side business, and that can bring a little bit extra cash flow, and every little bit helps. So I do think that it's easier to make more money today, but it still requires work. But to your point, nobody wants to say it because it seems like a harsh thing to say.
And a lot of times people take the easy way, where they want to have this income that it's going to be earned while they sleep. You're right. Sometimes it does take a little work, but a lot of times that work is worth it if you can make more money.
Right. All right, final question, and this is not anything in the book, but just from your perspective, we see waves of change over time with different generations and different values. Do you think that like the future of retirement and the way we kind of live our life is more of, people are getting married later now. So working a little bit harder early on, driving that income up, being able to save and invest at an earlier age, scaling it back to have better experiences when we have a family life and be there when our kids are there. and then maybe ramping it back up on the tail end and working a little bit longer. Do you think that's where we go, or do you think it's still going to be that traditional retirement that everybody tries to force themselves into?
I do think younger people are going to have a different idea of the concept of retirement. Even in us, yeah, like you said, I've already changed my mind about how my, the importance of my finances 3 or 4 times in the decade and a half or 2 decades that I've been working. So I don't see how it stays the same in terms of just shutting it off. I think people now are just more attuned to this stuff. And so even if it's just changing your career and doing something that you enjoy in retirement, even if it's not bringing in a big income, I think and I found in some of the research I did for this that the people who actually had something going on and still kept their brain working and kept thinking and had a goal and something to do, studies actually show they lived longer than people who just shut it off and kind of have nothing to look forward to. So I think young people are going to have a different idea of the concept, whether they think it's because of financial reasons or just personal and mental reasons as well.
Our friend Jeremy Walter had a real good blog post recently called Enough, and he quotes one of his friends in there that questions if we go about our career wrong and that we work so hard while our kids are young and then have all this free time when they're out of the house. And do we do it backwards where we don't work as hard when the kids are there so we can be there and enjoy the time with them and then make it on back up on the back end? And I think if you're going to go that route, going back to our biggest asset being time, that's one reason to get a good start early on to afford you that time to maybe scale it back in the middle and then ramp it back up on the back end.
Yeah, I wrote a blog post recently where I said a friend mentioned my daughter was 3 and she was with her friends and they said, we have about 14 or 15 more summers with them until they basically go off to college and they're gone forever. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And that, I think it has changed the way that I think about this stuff in terms of, yeah, I want to save and be prepared and make sure my family is going to be well taken care of with our finances, but I also want to enjoy my time with them now. And a lot of times that doesn't necessarily mean, financial outlays. It could just mean more time and managing your time in your career. But that's definitely something that having kids has stuck with me.
Have you read the book called The Family Boardroom? It's super, super short. It's basically, we have 18 summers with our kids, and the guy was a big real estate, successful in real estate, but he ended up having family board meetings, which is basically you go one-on-one dates. Every parent goes on a one-on-one date every quarter with the kids, and they get to choose whatever it is that we do to create these memories and experiences. To your point, it's not always spending money, it's just time. But the concept of we have 18 summers with them before they leave. And I had this epiphany, 2 summers ago now when Roman turned 9. And I thought to myself, he's halfway done with his time with me at home. And like this 9 years went fast. The next 9 are going to go even quicker. And it's, refocus some of the things that I want to do. Well, I took up more of your time than I anticipated. So Ben, I really appreciate it. I'll have links to Saving for Retirement in the show notes, in the notes on YouTube as well. But also encourage everybody to subscribe to A Wealth of Common Sense. Go listen to Animal Spirits. That's one of the few podcasts that I listen to every single week. I love listening to you, Michael, go back and forth, where you guys have conversations like this. Anywhere else you want to direct everybody?
No, that works, man.
All right. Well, I'll have links to all of that. I really appreciate you dropping in with me and chatting on the book. Everybody go check it out. Ben, thank you. And everybody, we'll see you in the next episode.